So let's get to a few different things that are around today. Can we begin with some... let's actually begin, before we self-loathing from The Guardian. I want to show you what the Prime Minister had to say tonight. You're all learning about this at the same time. He addressed the Lowy Institute. And apart from anything else, what I love about this is he's gone, look, we're part of the international community, sure. But we're not going to play this game where, because the UN tells us to do something, we must do it. This is what he said in a powerful speech, and I think this is right up there with the John Howard. We will decide who comes to this country and the manner in which they come. You want to talk about foreign policy? You want to talk about domestic policy? This would be the bloke who won an election and would easily win another one when he says stuff like this.
Fresh from the international stage, Scott Morrison has addressed Sydney's Lowy Institute, outlining what he says is a new and challenging world facing Australia.
We have entered a new era of strategic competition amongst very great powers. A not unnatural result, I must say, of the shifting power dynamics that we've been observing in our modern, more multipolar world.
And he warned we are not immune.
An era of insiders and outsiders, threatening social cohesion, provoking discontent and distrust.
The Prime Minister declared Australia will play a more active role in global rule setting in a bid to modernise multilateral frameworks. He's asked the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to provide a comprehensive audit of global institutions and rule-making processes.
This will not only include our international efforts to support global peace and stability and to promote open markets based on fair and transparent rules, but also other global standards that underpin commerce, investment and exchange.
And when it comes to China...
When we look at negotiating rules of the future of the global economy, for example, we would expect China's obligations simply to reflect its greater power status. That's a compliment. It's not a criticism. And that is what I mean when describing China as a newly developed economy.
Scott Morrison ending with a nod to the country he serves.
How good is Australia, Sir Frank? And may it ever be so.
Danica Di Giorgio, Sky News.
All right, Craig, as your boss, so no doubt you're going to say best speech ever, but what about the idea that is being put forward here about how, look, we'll be part of an international community, but just because a UN committee on insert says it doesn't mean we do it?
Look, I just read the quick transcript before we came on, and this is a very significant speech by the Prime Minister. We've seen the UN under the socialist Portuguese Guterres basically running amok, out of control. We cannot cede our sovereignty in this nation to these UN bureaucrats, and that's exactly the message the Prime Minister was giving tonight.
Well, literally, we had a scenario where we were being chided by the Saudis about human rights. Sure. We're being constantly chided by bodies that are beyond imperfect, that have member states in them that are, let's be honest, I can say it because clearly I'm nowhere near government or elected, that are inferior to us on matters to do with human rights. What do you think, Linda, about what the PM's telling the audience here in Sydney about how we play our part in the world from here on in?
Well, I think this was a backtrack. It was a backtrack about his earlier statements on China, and that's been a bit embarrassing for him. There's been quite a bit of a backlash about his statements and his sort of claim that they were this incredibly developed nation and therefore should have much more responsibility for their actions on, reducing dangerous climate change. And so he's really backtracked in this speech, is my read of it, because he's been a bit embarrassed about what he said.
All right. What do you think about this here, Stephen, about, again, the thrust of the Prime Minister saying whom runs the joint and it ain't New York?
Yeah, well, that's it. And I think the UN and everything else that's actually going on at the moment, it's been a difficult time for Australians to come to grips with the UN actually having a say here and all the rest of it. So, yeah, look, Mr Morrison, it's an interesting concept what he's doing. So we'll have to just look into that a bit more. I didn't get to see the whole thing today. We're moving office actually. The Morani office after 21 years has moved today, so I didn't get a lot of media today, which was unfortunate. So yeah, I'll have to. Yeah, well, I'll leave that one with the other ones for the time being.
I'm sure that everyone in that pub there listens to the Lowy Institute podcast, is standing by for the latest things that happen. So just ask anyone around. I'm sure that they will give it, they'll read about it tomorrow. Let's put it that way.